Okay. All right. And starting over. Hello, welcome to Classics Cut. This is Will Byrne,
Mike Breen,
Robert Tobias,
Deja Ellis.
thank you, and welcome again to our August selection for classics. Because we are having a Tolkien month, we are reading J.R.R. Tolkien's The Fall of Gondolin. This is one of Tolkien's earliest works in his legendarium from the First Age, which encapsulates his great city of Gondolin being overtaken and destroyed by the orcs and their master Morgoth, the first dark enemy of the world, Sauron's boss. And we are starting where Tuor, the great savior of the people of Gondolin, comes and meets This is when Ulmo goes to the city of Gondolin as the voice of Ulmo, the great Valar power, one of the brothers of Morgoth. And anyway, here is the Fall of Gondolin. Then spoke Ulmo also to Tuor some of his design and desire. But thereof Tuor understood little at that time, and feared greatly. Then Ulmo was wrapped in the mist as if it was of sea air in those inland places. And Tuor, with that music in his ears, would fain return to the regions of the great sea. Yet remembering his bidding turned and went inland along the river, and so fared until day. Yet he that has heard the conches of Ulmo hears them call him till death, and so did Tuor find. When day came he was weary, and slept till it was nigh dusk again, and the Noldoli came to him and guided him. So fared he many days by dusk and dark, and slept by day. And because of this it came afterwards that he remembered not over well the paths that he traversed in those times. Now Tuor and his guides held on untiring, and the land became one of rolling hills, and the river wound about their feet, and there were many dales of exceeding pleasantness, but there the Noldoli became ill at ease. These, said they, are the confines of those regions which Melko infesteth with his goblins, the people of hate. Far to the north, yet alas not far enough, were they 10,000 leagues, lie the mountains of iron, where sits the power and the terror of Melko, with whose thralls we are. Indeed, in this guiding of thee we do in secret of him, and did he know all of our purposes, the torments of the Balrogs would be ours. Falling then into such fear, the Noldoli soon after left him, and he fared alone into mid the hills, and their going proved ill afterwards, for Melko has many eyes, it is said, and while Tuor fared with the gnomes, they took him twilight ways and by many secret tunnels through the hills. But now he became lost, and climbed often to the tops of hills and knolls, scanning the lands about, that he might not see signs of any dwelling of folk. And indeed the city of the Gondolin was not found with ease, seeing that Melko and his spies had not even yet discovered it. It is said nonetheless that at this time the spies got wind thus, that a strange foot of man had been set in those lands, and that for that Melko doubled his craft and watchfulness. Now when the gnomes out of fear deserted Tuor, one Voronwe or Bronweg followed afar off, despite his fear, when chiding availed not to enhearten the others. Now Tuor had fallen into a great weariness, and was sitting beside the rushing stream, and the sea longing was about his heart, and he was minded once more to follow this river back to the wide waters and the roaring waves. But this Voronwe the faithful came up with him again, and standing by his ear said, O Tuor, think not but that thou shalt one day again see thy desire. Arise now, and behold, I will not leave thee. I am not of the road learned of the Noldoli, being a craftsman and maker of things by hand, of wood, of metal, and I have joined not the band of escort till late. Yet of old have I heard whispers and sayings said in secret amid the weariness of thraldom, concerning a city where Noldoli might be free could they find the hidden way thereto, and we twain without doubt may find a road to the city of stone, where is that freedom of the Gondolin. Know then that the Gondolin were that kin of the Noldoli who then alone escaped Melko's power, when at the battle of unnumbered tears he slew and enslaved their folk, and wove spells about them, and caused them to dwell in the hells of iron, faring thence at his will and bidding only. Long and time did Tuor and Voronway seek for the city of that folk, until after many days they came unto a steep dale amid the hills. Here went the river over a very stony bed, with much rush and noise, and it was curtained with a heavy growth of alders. But the walls of the dale were sheer, for they were nigh to some mountains which Voronway knew not. There, in the green wall, that gnome found an opening like a great door with sloping sides, and this was cloaked with thick bushes and long tangled undergrowth. Yet Voronway's piercing sight might not be deceived. Nonetheless, it is said that such magic had its builders set about it, by aid of Ulmo, whose power ran in that river, even if the dread of Melko fared upon its banks, that none save of the blood of the Nodali might light upon it thus by chance. Nor Tuor would have found it, but for the steadfastness of that gnome Voronway. Now the Gondolin made their abode thus secret out of dread of Melko. Yet even so, no few of the braver Nodali would slip down the river Syrian from those mountains. And if many perished so by Melko's evil, many, finding this magic passage, came at last to the city of stone and swelled its people. Greatly now did Tuor and Voronway rejoice to find this gate. Yet entering they found there a way dark, rough going and circuitous, and long time they travelled faltering within its tunnels. It was full of fearsome echoes, and there a countless stepping of feet would come behind them, so that Voronway became adread and said, "It is Melko's goblins, the orcs of the hills!" Then they would run, falling over stones in the blackness, till they perceived it was but the deceit of the place. Thus did they come, after it seemed a measureless time of fearful groping, to a place where a far light glimmered, and making for this gleam they came to a gate like that to which they had entered, but in no way overgrown. Then they passed into the sunlight, and could for a while see naught, but instantly a great gong sounded, and there was a clash of armour, and behold, they were surrounded by warriors in steel. Then they looked up and could see, and lo, they were at the foot of steep hills, and those hills made a great circle wherein lay a wide plain, and set therein, yet not rightly at the midmost, but rather near to that place where they stood, was a great hill with a level top, and upon that summit rose a city in the new light of the morning. Then Voronway spoke to the guard of the Gondolin, and his speech they comprehended, for it was the sweet tongue of the gnomes. Then spoke Tuor also, and questioned where they might be, and who might be the folk in arms who stood about, for he was in amaze and wondered much at the goodly fashion of their weapons. Then it was said to him by one of that company, "We are the guardians of the issue of the way of escape. Rejoice that you have found it, for behold before you the city of 7 names, where all who war with Melko may find hope." Then said Tuor, "What be those names?" And the chief of the guard made answer, "It is said and it is sung, Gondobar am I called, and Gothlimbar, city of stone and city of the dwellers in stone. Gondolin the stone of song, and Gwerthrin am I named, the tower of God, Garthurion of the secret place, for I am hidden from the eyes of Melko. But they who love me most greatly call me Loth, for like a flower am I, even Lothin Griol, the flower that blooms on the plain. Yet, said he, in our daily speech we speak, and we name it mostly Gondolin." Then said Voronway, "Bring us thither, for we fain would enter." And Tuor said his heart desired much to tread the ways of that fair city. Then said the chief of the guard that they themselves must abide here, for there were yet many days of their moon of watch to pass, but that Voronway and Tuor might pass on to Gondolin, and moreover that they would need thereto no guide. For lo, it stands fair to see and very clear, and its towers prick the heavens above the hill of watch in the hiddenmost plain. The Tuor and his guard and his companion fared over the plain that was of a marvellous level, broken but here and there by boulders round and smooth, which lay amid a sward, and by pools and rocky beds. Many a fair pathways lay across that plain, and they came after a day's light march to the foot of the hill of watch, which is in the tongue of the Nodali Amon Gwareth. Then did they begin to ascend the winding stairways which climbed up to the city gate, nor might anyone reach that city save on foot and espied from the walls. And as the westward gate was golden in the last sunlight, did they come to the long stairs' head, and many eyes gazed upon them from the battlements and towers. But Tuor looked upon the walls of stone and the uplifted towers, upon the glistening pinnacles of the town, And he looked upon the stairs of stone and marble, bordered by slender balustrades and cooled by the leap of thread-like waterfalls, seeking the plain from the fountains of Amangwarith. And he fared as one in some dream of the gods, for he deemed not such things were seen by men in the visions of their sleep, so great was his amaze at the glory of Gondolin. Even as so they came to the gate, Tuor in wonder and Voronway in great joy that daring much he had brought both Tuor hither in the will of Omo and had himself thrown off the yoke of Melko forever. Though he hated him no wise less, no longer did he dread that evil one with a binding terror, and of a sooth that spell which Melko held over the Nodali was one of bottomless dread, so that he seemed ever nigh them, even were they far from the hells of iron, and their hearts quaked, and they fled not even when they could, and to this Melko trusted often. Now is there a sally from the gates of Gondolin, and a throng comes about these twain in wonder, rejoicing that yet another of the Nodali has fled hither from Melko, and marvelling at the stature and the great limbs of Tuor, his heavy spear barbed with fishbone, and his great harp. Rugged was his aspect, and his locks unkempt, and he was clad in the skin of bears. It is written in those days that the fathers of the fathers of men were of less stature than men now are, and their children of elfinness of greater growth, yet was Tuor taller than anyone that stood there. Indeed, the Gondolin were not bent aback as some of their unhappy kin became, labouring without rest at delving and hammering for Melko. But small were they, and slender, and very lithe. They were swift of foot and surpassing fair, sweet and sad were their mouths, and their eyes had ever a joy within quivering to tears, for in those times the gnomes were exiles at heart, haunted with a desire for their ancient homes that faded not. But fate and unconquerable eagerness after knowledge had driven them into far places, and now were they hemmed by Melko, and must make their abiding as fair as they might by labour and love. How it came ever that even among men the Nodali have been confused with the orcs who are Melko's goblins, I know not, unless it be that certain of the Nodali were twisted to make the evil of Melko, and mingled among these orcs, for all that race were bred by Melko of the subterranean heats and slime. Their hearts were of granite, and their bodies deformed. Foul their faces which smiled not, but their laugh that of the clash of metal, and to nothing were they more fain than to aid in the basest of the purposes of Melko. The greatest hatred was between them and the Nodali, who named them Glamhoth, or people of dreadful hate.
Behold, the armed guardians of the gate pressed back the thronging folk that gathered about the wanderers, and the one among them spoke, saying, This is a city of watch and ward, Gondolin, on Amangwarith, where all may be free, who are of true heart, but not may be free to enter unknown. Tell me then your names. But Voronway named himself Bronweg of the Gnomes, come hither by the will of Ulmo, as guide to the son of men. And Tuor said, I am Tuor, son of Peleg, son of Indor, of the house of the Swan, of the sons of the men of the north, who live far hence, and I fare hither by the will of Ulmo, of the outer oceans. Then all who listened grew silent, and his deep and rolling voice held them in amaze, for their own voices were fair as the plash of fountains. Then a saying arose among them, Lead him before the king. Then did the throng return within the gates, and the wanderers with them, and Tuor saw they were of iron, and of great height and strength. Now the streets of Gondolin were paved with stone and wide, curbed with marble, and fair houses and courts amid gardens of bright flowers were set about the ways, and many towers of great slenderness and beauty builded of white marble and carved most marvelously rose to the heavens. Squares there were lit with fountains and the homes of birds that sang among the branches of their aged trees, but of all the greatest was the place where stood the king's palace, and the tower thereof was the loftiest in the city, and the fountains that played before the doors shot 20 fathoms and 7 in the air, and fell in a singing rain of crystal, Therein did the sun glitter splendidly by day, and the moon most magically shimmered by night. The birds that dwelt there were of the whitest of snow, and their voices sweeter than a lullaby of music. On either side of the doors was the palace. On either side of the doors of the palace were two trees, one that bore blossoms of gold and the other of silver. Nor did they fade, for they were shoots of old from the glorious trees of Valinor, and lit those places before Melko and the Gloomweaver withered them. And those trees, the Gondolin named, Glingol and Bansel. Then Turgon, king of Gondolin, robed in white with a belt of gold and a coronet of garnets, was upon his head, stood before his doors, and spoke from the head of the white stairs that led thereto. Welcome, O man of the land of shadows! Lo! Thy coming was set in our books of wisdom, and it has been written that there would come to pass many great things in the homes of the Gondolin, when so thou farst hither. Then spoke Tuor, and Ulmo set in his heart and majesty in his voice, Behold, O father of the city of stone, I am bidden by him who maketh deep music in the abyss, and who knoweth the minds of elves and men, to say unto thee that the days of release draw nigh. There have come to the ears of Ulmo whispers of your dwelling, and your hill of vigilance against the evil of Melko, and he is glad, but his heart is wroth, and the hearts of the Valar are angered to sit in the mountains of the Valinor, and look upon the world from the peak of Tanaquentil, seeing the sorrow of the thraldom of the Noldali, and the wanderings of men, for Melko ringeth them in the land of shadows beyond the hills of iron. Therefore have I been brought by a secret way to bid you number your hosts, and prepare for battle, for the time is ripe. Then spoke Turgon, That will I not do, though it be the words of Ulmo and all the Valar. I will not adventure this, my people, against the terror of the orcs, nor imperil my city against the fire of Melko. Then Tuor spoke, Nay, if thou dost not now dare greatly, then will the orcs dwell forever, and possess in the end most of the mountains of the earth, and cease not to trouble both elves and men, even though by other means the Valar contrive hereafter to release Noldoli. But if thou trust now to the Valar, though terrible the encounter, then shall the orcs fall, and Melko's power be minished to a little thing. But Turgon said that he was king of Gondolin, and no will should force him against his counsel to imperil the dear labor of long ages gone. But Tuor said, for thus was he bidden by Ulmo, who had feared the reluctance of Turgon, Then I am bidden to say that men of Gondolin repair swiftly and secretly down the river Sirion to the sea, and there build them boats and go back to Valinor. Lo, the paths thereto are forgotten, and the highways faded from the world, and the seas and mountains are about it. Yet still dwell there the elves on the hill of Kor, and the gods sit in Valinor, though their mirth is minished for sorrow and fear of Melko, and they hide their land and weave about it inaccessible magic, that no evil come to its shores. Yet still might thy messengers win there, and turn their hearts that they will rise in wrath and smite Melko, and destroy the hells of iron that he has wrought beneath the mountains of darkness. Then said Turgon, Every year at the lifting of winter have messengers repaired swiftly, and by stealth down the river that they call Sirion to the coasts of the great sea, and there builded them boats whereto have swans and gulls been harnessed, or the strong wings of the wind, and these have sought back beyond the moon and sun to Valinor. But the paths thereto are forgotten, and the highways faded from the world, and the seas and mountains are about it, and they that sit within the mirth reck little of the dread of Melko, or the sorrow of the world, but hide their land and weave about it inaccessible magic, that no tidings of evil come ever to their ears. Nay, enough my people have for years untold gone out to the world waters, never to return, but have perished in the deep places or wander, now lost in the shadows, and have no paths. And at the coming of the next year no more shall fare the sea, but rather will trust to ourselves and our city for the warding off of Melko, and there too have the Valar been of scant help aforetime. Then Tuor's heart was heavy, and Voronway wept. And Tuor sat by the great fountain of the king, and its splashing recalled the music of the waves. And his soul was troubled by the conches of Ulmo, and he would return down the waters of Sirion to the sea. But Turgon, who knew that Tuor, mortal as he was, had the favor of the Valar, marking his stout glance and the power of his voice, sent him and bade him dwell in Gondolin, and be in his favor, and abide even in the royal halls, if he would. Then Tuor, for he was weary, and that place was fair, said yea. And hence cometh the abiding of Tuor in Gondolin. Of all Tuor's deeds among the Gondolin, the tales tell not, but it is said that many a time would he have stolen thence, growing weary of the concourses of folk, and thinking of empty forest, and fell or hearing after the sea music of Ulmo. Had not his heart been filled with love for a woman of the Gondolin, and she was the daughter of the king.
Now Tuor learned many things in those realms taught by Voronway, whom he loved, and whom loved him exceeding greatly in return, or else he instructed by the skilled men of the city and the wise men of the king. Wherefore he became a man far mightier than aforetime. Wisdom was his counsel, and many things became clear to him that were unclear before, and many things known that are still unknown to mortal men. Then he heard concerning the city of Gondolin, and how unstaying labor through the ages of years had not suffered to its building and adornment, whereat folk travailed yet. Of the delving of the hidden tunnels he heard, which the folk named the Way of Escape, and how there had been divided counsel in the matter, yet pity for enthralled Nodoli had prevailed in the end in its making. Of the guard without ceasing he was told, that was held there in arms, and likewise at certain low places in the encircling mountains, and how watchers dwelt ever vigilant on the high peaks of the range, beside building beacons, ready for fire. For never did that folk cease to look for an onslaught of the orcs, did their strongholds become known. Now, however, was the guard of the hills maintained rather by custom than necessity, for the Gondolin had long ago, with unimagined toil, leveled and cleared and delved all that place about among the Warth, so that scarce gnome or bird or beast or snake could approach, but was espied from many leagues off. For among the Gondolin were many whose eyes were keener than the very hawks of Mawe Salumi, lord of gods and elves who dwell upon Tanaquil. And for this reason, they did not call that vale Tumladen, or the Valley of Smoothness. Now this great work was finished to their mind, and the folk were busier about the quarrying of metals, and the forging of all matters of swords and axes, spears, and bills, and the fashioning of coats of mail, byronies and hauberks, greaves and vambraces, helms and shields. Now it said that that already the whole folk of Gondolin, shooting with bows, without say day or night, might not expend their hoard of arrows in many years, and that yearly their fear of the orcs grew the less for it. There learnt Tuor of building with stone, of masonry, and of hewing of rock and marble, crafts of weaving and spinning, broidery and painting. Did he fathom and cunning metals? Music's most delicate he heard there, and these were they who dwelt in the southern city, the most deeply skilled. For there played a profusion of murmuring founts and springs. Many of the subtleties Tuor mastered and learned to entwine with his songs in the wonder and heart's joy of all who heard. Strange stories of the sun and moon and stars, and the manner of the earth and its elements, and of the depths of heaven were told to him, and the secret characters of the elves he learnt, their speeches in old tongues. He heard tell of Iluvatar, the Lord of always, who dwelleth beyond the world, and the great music under about Iluvatar's feet, in the utmost depths of time, whence came the making of the world, and the matter of it, and all therein, and their governance. Now for his skill and his great mastery over all lore and craft whatsoever, and his great courage of heart and body, did Tuor become comfort and stay to the king, who had no son, and he was beloved by the folks of Gondolin. Upon a time the king caused his most cunning artificers to fashion a suit of armor for Tuor as a great gift, and it was made of gnome steel overlaid with silver. But his helm was adorned with a device of metals and jewels, like two swan wings on either side, and a swan wing was wrought on his shield. But he carried an axe rather than a sword, and this is in the speech of Gondolin named him Dramboleg, for it buffet stunned its edge clove all armor. A house was built for him upon the southern wall, for he loved the free airs and liked not the close neighbors of other dwellings. There was his delight often to stand on the battlements at dawn, and the folk rejoiced to see the new light catch on the wings of his helm, and many murmured and would fain have backed him to battle with the orcs, seeing that the speeches of those two, Tuor and Tuorgan, before the palace were known to many, for the matter went not further for reverence to Tuorgan, because at this time in Tuor's heart he thought the words of Ulmo seemed to have grown dim and far off. Now came days when Tuor had dwelt among Gondolithum many years. Long had he known and cherished a love for the king's daughter, and now is his heart full of love. Great love too had Idril for Tuor, and the stands of her fate were woven with his, even from the day when she first gazed upon him from a high window, as he stood a wayworn supplement. Little cause had Tuorgan to withstand their love, for he saw in Tuor a kinsman of comfort and great hope. Thus was first wed a child of man with a daughter of Elphinase, nor was Tuor the last. Less bliss have many had than they, and their sorrow in the end was great. Yet great was the mirth of those days, where Idril and Tuor were wed before the folk in Gar-Enon, the place of the gods, nigh to the king's hall. A day of merriment was the wedding to the city of Gondolin, and great happiness to Tuor and Idril. Thereafter dwelt in joy in that house upon the walls that looked out over south to Tumolin. This was good to the hearts of all the city, save Meglin alone. Now the gnome was called an ancient house, though now where its numbers less than others. But he himself was nephew to the king by his mother, the king's sister Isfin, and the tale may not be told here. Now the sign of Meglin was a sable mole, and he was great among quarrymen, and chief of the delvers after ore, and many of these belonged to his house. Less fair was he than most of this goodly folk, swart and none too kindly mood. so that he won small love, and whispers there were that he had orc's blood in his veins, but I know not how this could be true. Now he had been often with the king of the hand of Idril, yet Turgan, finding her very loath, had as often said nay. For him seemed Meglin's suit was caused as much by the desire of standing in high power besides the royal throne as for love of the fair maid. Fair indeed was she, and brave thereto, and the people called her Idril of the silver feet, that she went ever barefoot and bareheaded, king's daughter as she was, save only at pomps of the Aenir, and Meglin gnawed his anger, seeing Tuor thrust him out. In these days came to pass the fulfillment of the time of the desire of the Valar and the hope of the Eldai. For in great love Idril bore to Tuor a son, and he was called Eadril. Now there too there are many interpretations both among elves and men, but belike it was a name wrought some secret tongue among the Gondolin, and that has perished with them from the dwelling of the earth. Now this babe was of great beauty, his skin of shining white, and his eyes of a blue sapphire, that the sky in the southern land, bluer than sapphires of the raiment of Manwë, and the envy of Meglin was deep at his birth. But the joy of Turgan and all his people was great indeed. Behold now, many years has gone since Tuor was lost amid the foothills and deserted by the Noldoli. Yet many years too have gone since to Melko's ears came first those strange tidings, faint were they and various in form, of a man wandering amid the dales of the waters of the Syrian. Now Melko was not much afraid of the race of men in those days, but his great power. For this reason did Ulmo work through one of this kindred for the better deceiving of Melko. Seeing that no Valar had scarce any of the Eldar, the Doli might stir unmaking his vigilance. Yet nonetheless, foreboding smote that ill heart at tidings, and he got together a mighty army of spies. Sons of the orcs were there, with eyes of yellow and green like cats that could pierce all glooms and see through mist or fog or night. Snakes that could go every whither and search all crannies in the deepest pits of the highest peaks. Listen to every whisper that ran the grass or echoed the hill. Wolves there were, and raving dogs, and great weasels full of thirst of blood, whose nostrils take scent moons old through running water, or whose eyes find among singling footsteps that have passed a lifetime since. Owls came, and falcons, whose keen glances might descry by day or night the fluttering of small birds in the woods of the world, and the movement of every mouse or vole or rat that crept and dwelt through the earth. All these he summoned to his hall of iron, and they came in multitudes. Thence he sent them all over the earth to seek this man who escaped from the land of shadows, but yet far more curious and more interestingly to search out the dwelling place of the Nodoli that had escaped his thraldom. For these his heart burnt to destroy or to enslave. Now Tuor dwelt in happiness and in great increase of knowledge and might in Gondolin. These creatures through the years, untearing nosed among the stones and rocks, haunted the forests and the hearths, espied the airs and lofty places, tracked all the paths, the dales and the plains, and neither let nor stayed. For this hunt they brought a wealth of tidings to Melko. Indeed, among many hidden things that dragged into the light, they discovered the way of escape, whereby Tuor and Vonore entered aforetime. Nor had they done so save by constraining some of the less stout of the Nodoli with dire threats of torment to join the great ransacking. For because of their magic about the gate, no folk of Melko, unaided by the gnomes, could come to it. Yet none they had pried of late far into the tunnels and captured within, many of the Nodoli creeping there to flee from thraldom. They had scaled, too, the encircling hills at certain places, and gazed upon the beauty of the city of Gondolin and the strength of Amon-Guath from afar. But into the plain they could not win from the vigilance of the guardians, the difficulty of those mountains. Indeed, Gondolin were mighty archers, and bows they made of a marvel of power. Therewith they might shoot an arrow into heaven 7 times as far as the best bowmen among men shoot at a mark upon the ground. And they would have suffered no falcon to hover long over the plain, or snake to crawl therein, for they liked not the creatures of blood, Beruglings of Melkau.
Now, in those days was Arundel 1 year old, when these ill tidings came to that city of the spies of Melkau, and how they encompassed the vale of Tumleden around. Then Turgon's heart was saddened, remembering the words of Tur in past years before the palace doors, and he caused the watch and ward to be thrice strengthened at all points, and engines of war to be devised by his artificers and set upon the hill. Poisonous fires and hot liquids, arrows and great rocks was he prepared to shoot down on any who would assail those gleaming walls, and then he abode as well, content as might be. But Tur's heart was heavier than the king's, for now the words of Olmo came ever to his mind, and their purport and gravity he understood more deeply than of old. Nor did he find any great comfort in Idril, for her heart boded more darkly even than his own. Know then that Idril had a great power of piercing with her thought the darkness of the hearts of elves and men, and the glooms of the future thereto. Further, even then is the common power of the kindreds of the Edelie.
Yeah.
Therefore she spoke thus on a day to Tur. Know, my husband, that my heart misgives me for doubt of Meglin, and I fear that he will bring an ill on this fair realm, though by no means may I see how or when. Yet I dread lest all that he knows of our doings and preparations become in some manner known to the foe, so that he devise a new means of whelming us, against which we have thought of no defense. Lo, I dreamed on the night that Meglin builded a furnace, and coming at us unawares, flung therein Arundel, our babe, and would after thrusting thee and me, but that for sorrow at the death of our fair child, I would not resist. And Tur answered, There is reason in thy fear, for neither is my heart good towards Meglin, yet is he the nephew of the king and thine own cousin, nor is there charge against him, and I see naught to do but to abide and watch. But Idril said, This is my rede thereto. Gather thou in deep secret those delvers and quarrymen, who by careful trial are found to hold least love for Meglin, by reason of the pride and arrogance of his dealings among them. From these thou must choose trusty men to keep watch upon Meglin, whenso he fares to the outer hills. Yet I counsel thee to set the greatest part of those in whose secrecy thou canst confide at a hidden delving, and to devise with their aid, howsoever cautious and slow that labor be, a secret way from thy house here beneath the rocks of this hill unto the vale below. Now this way must not lead toward the way of escape, for my heart bids me trust it not, but even to that far distant pass, the cleft of the eagles in the southern mountains, and the further this delving reached thitherward beneath the plain, so much the better would I esteem it. Yet let all this labor be kept dark, save from a few. Now there are none such delvers of earth or rock as the Nodoli, and this Malcolm knows. But in those places is the earth of a great hardness. And Tur said, The rocks of the hill of Amon-Guath are as iron, and only with much travail may they be cloven. Yet if this be done in secret, then must great time and patience be added. but the stone of the floor of the Vale of Tumleden is as forged steel, nor may it be hewn without the knowledge of the Gondolin, save in moons and years. Israel said then, Sooth this may be, but such is my rede, and there is yet time to spare. Then Tuor said that he might not see all its purport, but better is any plan than a lack of counsel, and I will do even as thou sayest. Now it is so chanced that not long after Meglin went to the hills for the getting of ore, and straying in the mountains alone, was taken by some of the orcs prowling there, and they would do him evil and terrible hurt, knowing him to be a man of the Gondolin. This was, however, unknown of Tuor's watchers. But evil came into the heart of Meglin, and he said to his captors, Know then that I am Meglin, son of Eol, who had to wife Isfin, sister of Turgan king of the Gondolin. But they said, What is that to us? And Meglin answered, Much is that to you, for if you slay me, be it speedy or slow, ye will lose great tidings concerning the city of Gondolin that your master would rejoice to hear. Then the orcs stayed their hands, and said they would give him life if the matters he opened to them seemed to merit that. And Meglin told them of all the fashion of that plain and city, of its walls, and their height and thickness, and the valor of its gates. Out of the host of men at arms who now obeyed Turgan, he spoke, and the countless horde of weapons gathered for their equipment, of the engines of war and the venomous fires. Then the orcs were wroth, and having heard these matters, were yet for slaying him there, and then as one who impudently enlarged the power of his miserable folk to the mockery of the great might and puissance of Melko. Thank you. But Meglin, catching at a straw, said, Think ye not that ye would rather pleasure your master if ye bore to his feet so noble a captive, that he might hear my tidings of himself and judge of their verity? Now this seemed good to the orcs, and they returned from the mountains about Gondolin to the hills of iron and the dark hills of Melko. Thither they hailed Meglin with them, and now he was in a sore dread. But when he knelt before the black throne of Melko, in terror of the grimness of the shapes about him, of the wolves that sat beneath the chair, and of the adders that twined about its legs, Melko bade him speak. Then told he those tidings, and Melko, hearkening, spoke very fair to him, that the insolence of his heart in great measure returned. Now the end of this was that Melko, aided by the cunning of Meglin, devised a plan for the overthrow of Gondolin. For this Meglin's reward was to be a great captaincy among the orcs. Yet Melko proposed not in his heart to fulfill such a promise. But Tuor and Arendelle should Melko burn, and Idril be given to Meglin's arms, and such promises was that evil one fain to redeem. Yet as meed of treachery did Melko threaten Meglin with the torment of the Balrogs. Now these were demons with whips of flame and claws of steel, by whom he tormented those of the Nodali who durst withstand him in anything. And the elder have called them Malkaraki, thank you. But the rede that Meglin gave to Melko was that not all the host of the orcs, nor the Balrogs, in their fierceness, might by assault or siege hope ever to overthrow the walls and gates of Gondolin, even if they availed to win unto the plain without. Therefore he counseled Melko to devise out of his sorceries a succor for his warriors in their endeavor. From the greatness of his wealth of metals and his powers of fire, he bid make beasts like snakes and dragons of irresistible might, that should overcreep the encircling hills, and lap that plain and its fair city in flame and death. Then Meglin was bidden fare home, lest at his absence men suspect somewhat. But Melko wove about him the spell of bottomless dread, and he had thereafter neither joy nor quiet in his heart. Nonetheless, he wore a fair mask of good liking and gaiety, so that men said, Meglin is softened, and he was held in less disfavor. Yet Idril feared him the more. Now Meglin said, I have labored much and am minded to rest, and to join in the dance and the song and the merry makings of the folk. And he went no more quarrying stone or ore in the hills. Yet in sooth he thought herein to drown his fear and disquiet. A dread possessed him that Melko was ever at hand, and this came of the spell, and he durst never again wander amid the mines, lest he again fall in with the orcs and be bidden once more to the terrors of the halls of darkness.
Now the years fare by, and egged by Idril, Tuor keepeth ever at his secret delving. But seeing that the leaguer of spies hath grown thinner, Turgon dwelleth more at ease and less in fear. Yet these years are filled by Melko in the uttermost ferment of labour, and all the thrall folk of the Gondolin must dig unceasingly for metals, while Melko sitteth and deviseth fires, and calleth flames and smokes to come from the lower heats. Nor doth he suffer any of the Gondolin to stray ever a foot from their places of bondage. Then on the time Melko assembled all his most cunning smiths and sorcerers, and of iron and flame they wrought a host of monsters, such as have only been seen at that time, and shall not be seen again till the great end. Some were all of iron, so cunningly linked that they might flow like slow rivers of metal, or coil themselves around and above all obstacles before them. And these were filled in their innermost depths with the grimmest of the orcs, with scimitars and spears. Others were of bronze and copper, and were given hearts and spirits of blazing fire, and they blasted all that stood before them with the terror of their snorting, or trampled whatso escaped the ardour of their breath. Yet others were like creatures of pure flame, that writhed like ropes of molten metal, and they brought to ruin whatever fabric they came nigh, and iron and stone melted before them and became as water, and upon them rode the Balrogs in hundreds. And these were the most dire of all those monsters which Melko devised against Gondolin. Now when the 7th summer had gone since the treason of Meglin, and Erendil was yet of very tender years, though a valorous child, Melko withdrew all his spies, for every path and corner of the mountains was now known to him. Yet the Gondolin thought in their unwariness that Melko would no longer seek against them, perceiving their might and the impregnable strength of their dwelling. But Idril fell into a dark cloud, and the light of her face was clouded, and many wondered thereat. Yet Turgon reduced the watch and ward to its ancient numbers, and to somewhat less, as autumn came and the gathering of fruits was over, folk turned with glad hearts to the feasts of winter. But Tuor stood upon the battlements and gazed upon the encircling hills. Now behold, Idril stood beside him, and the wind was in her hair, and Tuor thought that she was exceeding beautiful, and stooped to kiss her. But her face was sad, and she said, Now come the days when thou must make choice. And Tuor knew not what she said. Then drawing him within their halls, she said to him how her heart misgave her for fear concerning Erendil their son, and foreboding that some great evil was nigh, and that Melko would be at the bottom of it. Then Tuor would comfort her, but might not, and she questioned him concerning the secret delving, and he said how it now led a league into the plain, and at that was her heart somewhat lightened. But still she counselled that the delving be pressed on, and that henceforth should speed way more than secrecy, because now the time is very near. And another rede she gave him, and this he took also, that certain of the bravest and most true among the lords and warriors of the Gondolin be chosen with care, and told of that secret way in its issue. These she counselled him to make into a stout guard, and to give them his emblem to wear, that they become his folk, and to do this under pretext of the right and dignity of a great lord, kinsman to the king. Moreover, said she, I will get my father's favour to that. In secret too she whispered to folk that if the city came to its last stand, or Turgon be slain, that they rally about Tuor and her son. And to this they laughed a yea, saying, however, that Gondolin would stand as long as Taniquetil on the mountains of Elm. But to Turgon she spoke not openly, nor suffered Tuor to do so, as he desired, despite their love and reverence for him. A great and a noble and a glorious king he was, seeing that he trusted in Meglin, and held with blind obstinacy his belief in the impregnable might of the city, and that Melko sought no more against it, perceiving that no hope were therein. Now in this he was ever strengthened by the cunning sayings of Megan. Behold, the guile of that gnome was very great, for he wrought much in the dark, so that folk said, he doth well to wear the sign of a sable mole. And by reason of the folly of certain of the quarrymen, and yet more by reason of the loose words of certain among his kin, to whom word was somewhat unwarily spoken by Tuor, he gathered a knowledge of the secret work, and laid against that a plan of his own. So winter deepened, and it was very cold for those regions, so that frost fared about the plain of Tumladen, and ice lay in its hills. Yet the fountains played ever on Emon Gwareth, and the 2 trees blossomed, and folk made merry to the day of terror that was hidden in the heart of Melko. In these ways that bitter winter passed, and the snows lay deeper than ever upon the encircling hills. Yet in its time a spring of wondrous glory melted the skirts of those white mantles, and the valley drank the waters and burst into flowers. So came and passed with revelry of children the festival of Nostin Lothian, or the birth of flowers, and the hearts of the Gondolin were uplifted for the good promise of the year. And now at length is that great feast, Tanin Asta, or the gates of summer, near at hand. For know that on a night it was their custom to begin a solemn ceremony at midnight, continuing even until the dawn of Tanin Asta broke, and no voice was uttered in the city from midnight till the break of day, but the dawn they hailed with ancient songs. For years uncounted had the coming of summer been thus greeted with music of choirs, standing upon their gleaming eastern wall. And now comes even the night of vigil, and the city is filled with silver lamps, while in the groves upon the new-leaved trees lights of jeweled colors swing, and low musics go along the ways, but no voice sings until the dawn. The sun has sunk beyond the hills, and folk array them for the festival very gladly and eagerly, glancing in expectation to the east. Lo, even when she had gone and all was dark, a new light suddenly began, and a glow there was, but it was beyond the northward heights, and men marveled, and there was a thronging of the walls and battlements. Then wonder grew to doubt as the light waxed and became yet redder, and doubt to dread, as men saw the snow upon the mountains dyed as it were with blood. And thus it was that the fire serpents of Melko came upon Gondolin. Then came over the plain riders who bore breathless tidings from those who kept vigil on the peaks, and they told of the fiery hosts and the shapes like dragons, and said, Melko is upon us. Great was the fear and anguish within that beauteous city, and the streets and byways were filled with the weeping of women and the wailing of children, and the squares with the mustering of soldiers and the ring of arms. There were the gleaming banners of all the great houses and kindreds of the Gondolin. Mighty was the array of the house of the king, and their colors were white and gold and red, and their emblems the moon and the sun and the scarlet heart. Now in the midst of these stood Tuor above all hearts, and his mail of silver gleamed, and about him was a press of the stoutest of the folk. Lo, all these wore wings as it were of swans or gulls upon their helms, and the emblem of the white wing was upon their shields. But the folk of Meglin were drawn up in the same place, and sable was their harness, and they bore no sign or emblem, but their round caps of steel were covered with moleskin, and they fought with axes two-headed like mattocks. There Meglin, prince of Gondobar, gathered many warriors of dark countenance and lowering gaze about him, and a ruddy glow shone upon their faces and gleamed about the polished surfaces of their accoutrement. Behold, all the hills to the north were ablaze, and it was as if rivers of fires ran down the slopes that led to the plain of Tumladen, and the folk might already feel the heat thereof.
And many other kindreds were there, the folk of the swallow and the heavenly arch, and from these folk came the greatest number and the best of the bowmen, and they were arrayed upon the broad places of the walls. Now the folk of the swallow bore a fan of feathers on their helms, and they were arrayed in white and dark blue and in purple and black, and showed an arrowhead on their shields. Their lord was Duilin, swiftest of all men to run and leap, and surest of archers at the mark. But they of the heavenly arch, being a folk of uncounted wealth, were arrayed in a glory of colors, and their arms were set with jewels that flamed in the light now over the sky. Every shield of that battalion was of the blue of the heavens, and its boss, a jewel built of 7 gems, rubies and amethysts and sapphires, emeralds, chrysoprase, topaz and amber, but an opal of great size was set in their helms. Eaglemoth was their chieftain, and wore a blue mantle upon which the stars were broidered in crystal, and his sword was bent. Now none else of the Noldoli bore curved swords, yet he trusted rather to the bow, and shot therewith further than any among that host. There too were the folk of the Pillar, and of the Tower of Snow, and both these kindred were marshalled by Penlud, tallest of gnomes. There were those of the tree, and they were a great house, and their raiment was green. They fought with iron-studded clubs, and with slings, and their lord Galdor was held the most valiant of all the Gondolin, save Turgon alone. There stood the house of the Golden Flower, who bore a rayed sun upon their shield, and their chief, Glorfindel, bore a mantle so broidered with threads of gold that it was diapered with a celadine as a field in the spring, and his arms were damascened with cunning gold. Then came there from the south of the city the people of the fountain, and Ecthelion was their lord, and silver and diamonds were their delight, and swords very long and bright and pale did they wield, and they went into battle to the music of flutes. Behind them came the host of the harp, and this was a battalion of brave warriors, but their leader Salgant was a craven, and he fawned upon Meglin. They were dight with tassels of silver and tassels of gold, and a harp of silver shone in their blazonry upon a field of black. But Salgant bore one of gold, and he alone rode into battle of all the sons of the Gondolin, and he was heavy and squat. Now the last of the battalions was furnished by the folk of the Hammer of Wrath, and of these came many of the best smiths and craftsmen, and all that kindred reverence Auli, the smith, more than all other Einir. They fought with great maces like hammers, and their shields were heavy, for their arms were very strong. In older days they had been much recruited by the Noldoli, who escaped from the mines of Melko, and the hatred of this house for the works of that evil one, and the Balrogs his demons, was exceeding great. Now their leader was Rog, strongest of the gnomes, scarce second in valor to the Galdor of the tree. The sign of this people was a stricken anvil, and a hammer that smiteth sparks about it was set upon their shields, and red gold and black iron was their delight. Very numerous was that battalion, nor had any among them a faint heart, and they won the greatest glory of all their fair houses in the struggle against doom. Yet were they ill-fated, and none ever fared away from that field, but fell about Rog and vanished from the earth, and with them much craftsmanship and skill was vanished forever. This was the fashion and the array of the elven houses of the Gondolin, with their signs and emblems, and the bodyguard of Tuor, the folk of the wings, was accounted the 12th. Now is the face of the chieftain grim, and he looks not to live long. And there in his house upon the walls Idril arrays herself in mail, and seeks Irindel. And that child was in tears for the strange light of red, and played about the walls of the chamber where he slept, and the tales that his nurse Melith had woven him concerning fiery Melko at times of his waywardness came to him and troubled him. But his mother coming set about him a tiny coat of mail that she had let fashion in secret, and at that he was glad and exceeding proud, and he shouted for pleasure. Yet Idril wept, for much had she cherished in her heart the fair city, and her goodly house, and the love of Tuor, and herself that had dwelt therein. But now she saw its destroying nigh at hand, and feared that her contriving would fail against this overwhelming might of the terror of the serpents. It was now 4 hours still from the middle night, and the sky was red in the north and the east and west, and those serpents of iron had reached the levels of Tomb-Laden, and those fiery ones were among the lowest slopes of the hills, so that the guards were taken and set in evil torment by the Balrogs that scoured all about, saving only the furthest south where the Christhorn, the cleft of eagles. Then did King Turgon call a council, and thither fared Tuor and Meglin as royal princes, and Duelin came with Eaglemoth and Penlod the tall, and Rog strode thither with Galdor of the tree, and golden Glorfindel, and Ecthelion of the voice of music. Thither too fared Salgant, a tremble at the tidings, and other nobles beside of less blood, but better heart. Then spoke Tuor, and this was his rede, that a mighty sally be made forthwith, ere the light and heat grew too great in the plain, and many backed him, being but of different minds as to whether the sally should be made by the entire host with the maids and wives and children midmost, or by diverse bands seeking out in many directions. And to this last Tuor leaned. But Meglin and Salgant alone held other counsel, and were for holding the city and seeking to guard those treasures that lay within. Out of guile did Meglin speak thus, fearing lest any of the Noldoli escape the doom that he had brought upon them, and he dreaded lest his treason become known, and somehow vengeance find him in after days. But Salgant spoke, both echoing Meglin, and being grievously afraid of issuing from the city, for he was fain rather to do battle from an impregnable fortress than to risk hard blows upon the field. Then the lord of the house of the mole played upon the one weakness of Turgon, saying, Lo! O king, the city of Gondolin contains a wealth of jewels and metals, and stuffs, and of things wrought by the lands of the gnomes to surpassing beauty, and all these thy lords, more brave meseems than wise, would abandon to the foe. Even should victory be thine upon the plain, the city will be sacked, and the Balrogs get hence with a measureless booty. And Turgon groaned, for Meglin had known his great love for the wealth and loveliness of that burg upon Amon Gwareth. Again said Meglin, putting fire in his voice, Lo! Hast thou for naught labored through years uncounted at the building of walls of impregnable thickness, and in the making of gates whose valor may not be overthrown? Is the power of the hill Amon Gwareth become as lowly as the deep vale, or the hoard of weapons that lie upon it, and its unnumbered arrows of so little worth that in the hour of peril thou wouldst cast all aside and go naked into the open against enemies of steel and fire, whose trampling shakes the earth, and the encircling mountains ring with the clamor of their footsteps? And Salgant quailed to think of it, and spoke noisily, saying, Meglin speaks well, O king, hear thou him. Then the king took the counsel of those twain, though all the lords said otherwise, nay, rather the more for that. Therefore, at his bidding, does all the folk abide now the assault upon their walls. But Tuor wept, and left the king's hall, and gathering the men of the wing, went through the streets seeking his home. And by that hour was the light great and lurid, and there was stifling heat, and a black smoke and stench arose about the pathways to the city.
Now came the monsters across the valley, and the white towers of Gondolin rended before them. And the stoutest were dreaded, seeing those dragons of fire, and those serpents of bronze and iron that fare already about the hill of the city. And they shout unavailing arrows at them. Then is there a cry of hope, for behold, the snakes of fire may not climb the hill for its steepness and for its glassiness, and by reason of the quenching waters that fell upon the sides. Yet they lie about its feet, and a vast steam arises, where the streams of Ammon Gothwell and the flames of the serpents drive together. Then grew there such heat that women became faint, and men sweated to weariness beneath their mail. And all the springs of the city, save only the fountain of the king, grew hot and smoked. But now Gothmog, lord of Balrog, as captain of the host of Melko, took counsel and gathered all his things of iron that could coil themselves around and above all obstacles before them. These he bade pile themselves before the northern gate, and behold, the great spires reached even to its threshold, and thrust at the tower's bastions about it. And by reason of exceeding heaviness of their bodies, those gates fell, and great was the noise thereof. Yet the most of the walls around them stood firm. Then the engines and the catapults of the king poured darts and boulders of molten metals, and those ruthless beasts, and their howls' bellies clanged beneath the buffering, yet availed not, for they might not be broken, and the fires rolled off them. Then were the topmost opened about the middles, and an innumerable host of orcs, goblins of hatred, poured therefrom into the breach. And who shall tell of the scimitars or the flesh of their broad-bladed spears with which they stabbed? Then did Rog shout in a mighty voice, and all the people the hammer of wrath, and the kindred of the tree, with Galdor the valiant, leap at their foe. There the blows of their great hammers and the dint of their clubs rang in the encircling mountains, and the orcs fell like leaves, and those of the swallow and the arch poured arrows like the dark rains of autumn upon them, and both orcs and Gondolin fell thereunder for the smoke and the confusion. Great was the battle, yet for all the valor of Gondolin, by reason of the might of ever-increasing numbers, were borne slowly backwards till the goblins held part of the northernmost city. At this time Tuor at the head of the folk of the wings, struggling in the turmoil of the city. And now he wins through to his house and finds that Meglin is before him. Trusting in the battle now begun about the northern gates, the uproar of the city, Meglin had looked to this hour for consummation of his designs. Learning much of the secret delvings of Tuor, yet only at the last moment he got knowledge, he could not discover it all. He said naught to the king or any other, for it was his thought that of a secretive tunnel would go into the end towards the way of escape, thus being the most nigh to the city, and he had a mind to use this to his good, and to the ill of the Nodoli. Messengers by great stealth he dispatched to Melko to set a guard about the outer issue of the way when the assault was made. But he himself now thought to take Eandril and cast him into the fire breath of the walls, and seizing Idril, he would constrain her to guide him to the secrets of passage, that he might win out this terror of fire and slaughter, and drag her withal along with him to the lands of Melko. Now Meglin was afeard that even the secret token which Melko had given him would fail in the direful sack, and was minded to help Inui for the fulfillment promises of safety. No doubt, however, of the death of Tuor and the great burning, for to Salget he had confided the task of delaying him in the king's halls, and egging him straight thence into a deadliest fight. But lo, Salget fell into a terror unto death, and he rode home and lay there now quake on his bed. But Tuor fared home the folk of the wing. Now Tuor did this through his valor, left the noise of war, and he might take farewell to Idril and Arundel, and speed with them a bodyguard down the secret way ere he returned himself to the battle wrong to die if he must. But he found a press of the mole folk about his door, and these were the grimmest and least good-hearted of folk that Meglin might get in the city. Yet were they free Nodoli, and under no spell of Melko like their master. Wherefore, through their lordship of Meglin, they aided not Idril, no more would they touch his purpose despite all his curses. Now that Meglin had Idril by the hair, and sought to drag her to the battlements out of cruelty of heart, that she might see the fall of Andril to the flames, but he was cumbered by that child, and she fought, alone as she was, like a tigress for all her beauty and slenderness. There now he struggles and delays amid oaths, while the folk of the wing draws nigh, and lo, Tuor gives a shout so great that the orcs hear it afar, and waver at the sound of it. Like a crash of tempest, the guard of the wing were amid the men of the mole, and these were stricken asunder. When Meglin saw that he would stab Arundel with a short knife he had, but the child bit his left hand, and his teeth sank in, and he staggered and stabbed weakly at the mail of the small coat, turned the blade aside. And thereupon Tuor was upon him with a wrath terrible to see. He seized Meglin by the hand that held the knife, and broke the arm with a wrench, and then taking him by the middle leapt him upon the wall, and flung him far out. Great was the fall of his body, and it smote among Gwathro 3 times ere it pitched midmost the flames. And the name of Meglin has gone out in shame among the Eldar and the Nodoli. Then the warriors of the mole, being more numerous than those of the wing, and loyal to the Lord, came at Tuor. They were great blows, but no man might stand before the wrath of Tuor. And they were smitten and driven to fly to what dark holes they might, or flung from the walls. Then Tuor and his men must get them to the battle of the gate, for the noise of it has grown very great, and Tuor has still in his heart that the city might stand. Yet with Irodil he left their Vonway against his will, and some other swordsmen to be guard for her till he returned, or might send tidings from the fray. Now was the battle at the gate very evil indeed. Dulian of the Swallow, as he shot from the walls, was smitten by a fiery bolt the Balrogs, who left about the base of Amon-Gwathway. And he fell from the battlements and perished. Then the Balrogs continued to shoot darts of fire and flaming arrows like small snakes into the sky. They fell upon the roofs and gardens of Gondolin, till all the trees were scorched and the flowers and grasses burnt up, and the whiteness of those walls and colonnades were blackened and seared. Yet a worse matter was that a company of those demons climbed upon the coils of the serpents of iron, and had thence loosed unceasingly from their bows and slings, till the fire began to burn the city to back of the main army of the defense. Then said Rog in a great voice, "Who now shall fear the Balrogs for all their terrors? See before us the accursed ones who for ages have tormented the children of the Nodoli, and who now come to set fire at our backs with their shooting. Come ye of the hammer of wrath, and we will smite them for their evil." Thereupon he lifted his mace, and its handle was long, and he made a way before him by the wrath of his onset, even unto the fallen gate. But all the people of the stricken anvil ran behind like a wedge, and sparks came from their eyes for the fury of their rage. A great deed was that sally, and the Nodoli sing yet, and many of the orcs were borne back into the fires below. But the men of Rog leapt even beyond the coils of the serpent, and came at those Balrogs, and smote them grievously. For all they had whips of flame and claws of steel, and were in stature very great. They battered them into naught, or catching their whips, wielded these against them. They tore them even as they had aforetime torn at the gnomes, And the great number of Balrogs that perished was a marvel and dread to all the hosts of Melko. For ere that day, never had any of the Balrogs been slain by the hands of elves or men. Then Gothmog, lord of the Balrogs, gathered all of his demons that were about the city and ordered them thus. A number made for the folk of the hammer and gave before them. But the great company rushed upon the flank, contrived to get their backs higher upon the coils of the drakes near to the gate, so that Rog might not win back save with a great slaughter among his own folk. But Rog, seeing this, essayed not to win back, as was hoped. With all his folk fell upon those whose part was going before him, and they fled before him, now dire need rather than of craft. Down into the plain where they harried, and their shrieks rent the airs tomb-laden. Then that house of the hammer fared about smiting and hewing the Asajj bands of Melko, until they were hemmed at last by an overwhelming force of the orcs and the Balrogs. Fire drakes was loosed upon them. There did they perish about Rog, hewing to the last, till iron and flame overcame them. And it is yet sung that each man of the hammer of wrath took the lives of 7 foemen to pay his own. Then did dread fall on more heavily still those in Gondolin, the death of Rog, and the loss of the battalion. And they gave back further yet into the city. And Penelod perished there in the lane with his back to the wall, and about many of his men of the pillar, and many of the tower of snow.
Well, those are the first 50 pages of The Fall of Gondolin by the Prince of Fantasists, J.R.R. Tolkien. We have 3 copies in our system. We heartily encourage you to pick up this book, as it is a wonderful book that will lead into Lord of the Rings and the Rings of Power. So until then, I'm Will Byrne.
Mike Breen.
One of the guys is going to be checking out one of those 3 books in a moment.
And Deja Ellis, check out the book.
And we are Classics Cut, and we are cutting out.